And I'll also put a live transcript up for those who would like to use that at the bottom. Wonderful. So welcome on this Monday. Appreciate everybody and their flexibility with the quick turnarounds and being able to schedule 2 meetings this August. I'm going to throw up the PowerPoint so that you all can kind of see what it is that we're gonna dig into today on our agenda. All right, so all right, apologies about that. Okay. So today we are going to kick off our meeting with Jennifer, who's going to give us some more information about Friends of Olmsted Park. And then we're going to revisit those goals in the vision that we made at our last session together. And then we are going to dig deep into the process of developing what our outreach strategy will be and be able to kind of be able to use that to guide and shape our conversations around identifying the tactics and tools for outreach. And then we'll do our best to start beginning to draft the implementation plan and go over next steps. So this is what we have on our agenda for today. If that looks good to everyone, we will get started. And for those of you who just joined, we have a new person from SDOT who will be joining our, she's not new to SDOT, but she's new to our group. But Ching will be joining us on this project for support. So see, we have a couple of people that just entered. And if folks could write in the chat, just your name, your pronouns, and then how, again, you are associated to Lake Washington Boulevard. That would be great so that we can have folks introduce themselves to Ching as well. And then with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jennifer. And I was told that you will need to share your screen so I can make sure that you have access to do that. Okay.
Let's see. Hi all. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to get to give you a quick overview, and I am going to do this in 10 minutes, and I'm going to be super efficient and good at it. And I apologize ahead of time. I didn't have as much time as I would like to kind of polish this up, but I just wanted to share a few ideas with you, and then I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. So I'll start with just the basics, just to make sure everyone knows who we're talking about, is that we have Frederick Law Olmsted Sr., kind of the most famous of the Olmsteds. He's the one responsible for Central Park and Prospect Park and the Columbian Exposition in Chicago. And he sort of is recognized as the person who established landscape architecture in the United States. Our Olmsted in Seattle is John Olmsted. That is his stepson and nephew. His brother passed away. He married his brother's widow, and John became his stepson. And he is the Olmsted who worked with FLO, as we call him, Senior, for several decades, and then started a firm with his half-brother, Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., also known as Rick. And they formed the Olmsted Brothers firm, and that's who came out to Seattle in 1903. John Olmsted primarily worked with the city of Seattle Parks Department on our park system plan. And so there's a few ideas, going on here. One is that the city of Seattle, the civic leaders want to bring somebody out to develop park system because that's sort of recognized at that time that this is what makes you a real American city. And it's not just parks, but it's a park system. And so this is Buffalo. This is the first public park system in the United States, developed in 1867 by Frederick Law Olmsted Sr. and his partner, Calvert Vaux. And you can see that there are the big parks connected with boulevards. And so he sees the boulevards as the connective tissue for a park system. He calls them linear parks. And the idea is that you want to be able to get people to the park landscape as quickly as possible throughout the city. And so you may live a ways away from a large park, but if you can get to that boulevard and follow it to the parks, then you can kind of extend that experience and sort of amplify its impact on the community. And another big sort of impetus and value of an Olmsted Park system, is that not everyone can afford to get out of the city, Olmsted recognizes. And so they want to have green space within the city. And this isn't just because it's nice. This is because if we're going to have a democracy with sort of limited suffrage at this point, but with the idea that it is more expansive than European self-governance, is that you have to have a healthy populace. You have to have voters who are healthy in mind and body. And the idea is that access to open space, to nature, is an essential component of that health of the sort of public. And so, sorry, this slide is out of order. Skip that. So we have the first map developed in 1903. This is Olmsted's first park system envisioned for the city. It has three elements. It has the large parks like Washington Park and Woodland Park, and he hopes Seward Park, although that's outside the city limits at the time, Jefferson Park there. It has small parks that are scattered throughout the city wherever there is still open space. So you'll notice there is a real void there in the downtown area. And so that is a problem from the very beginning, that if it is already developed as a park, then it cannot be acquired for the park system. And anywhere that is platted is often very expensive for acquisition. And so that also limits where the parks can be acquired. But the idea is to have that smaller parks in the neighborhoods. And then the third element is the boulevards. And those are that connective sinew almost that you see going through the city. And so Olmsted was invited back in 1908 to do another comprehensive plan that is after the northern and southern parts of the city are annexed. And so he develops this and he puts out a whole plan, sort of a report with this plan. And he says that the goal is to have a park for small children within a half mile of every house and a play field for larger children within a mile of every home. We have largely acquired those properties throughout the city. There are some real gap areas, and one of the biggest ones is in Northeast Seattle, just because so much of that area was acquired after it had been developed. And so it was very hard to identify places that could be developed as parks. And so it's sort of been developed in an ad hoc manner. And so then in 1910, they invited Olmsted back to do a playground report. And that was the idea that he would help them identify places for those larger play fields that have the field houses with them. And so the first one's Hiawatha Park in West Seattle, but then there's Rainier Playfield, the Collins Playfield that are developed around the city in accordance with that plan. Collins Playfield has since been replaced with Judkins Playfield. That's why it's not on maps anymore. And so what we got in the city was a whole series of different experiences. And that's one of the really important parts of the Olmsted vision and principles, is that you have a lot of variety, you capture the genius of place. This is Lake Washington Boulevard at Coleman Park. That's Coleman Park in the distance, and then Mount Baker Beach is, I'm pointing my screen like you can see it. Coleman, here I'll use the cursor. This is Mount Baker Beach here. And so that is one part of the Boulevard experience. There is also the part along the lake shore. This is in Washington Park, Foster Island at the time. but he really wants to have those kind of peekaboo views amongst the vegetation out to the lake. He has Interlochen Boulevard, which is a ravine boulevard, which is very rustic. You can see the bridges are that rough-hewn timbers, and they're winding, and all of the native plants are planted or left close to the boulevard. And then you have a park like Volunteer Park, which is in a more developed neighborhood. All these landscapes sort of look to their surroundings for their definition. And so that is why you have a more formal landscape in that park. And you can see the symmetry and the planting beds and the non-native plants and all of those things and the structures that are built into that park's design. And so by about 1913, we have a good system developed. Parks are getting developed. Lake Washington Boulevard is developed. You can see here, this is before the lake was lowered. The sort of armoring of the shores, because the lake was 9 feet higher before they opened the Lake Washington Ship Canal, and then the lake was lowered. And just a little piece of trivia, I did not turn on a timer, but I still have to tell the story, it's really great, is the reason that we have that whole area that you see to the right here, this lawn area, is because Olmsted convinced the Parks Department to go to the state legislature and ask them to give for free any land that was adjacent to city-owned land when the lake was lowered. And so the property owners along the lake, self-interest, they wanted to ensure that nobody else bought that lakeshore land that would be exposed. They donated a strip of land along their subdivisions. And so everywhere except for along Leschi, where there was already development, you see that the city acquired all of that lakeshore land for free from the state. And that's why we have that really nice right-of-way on the right. There's another view of, this is from the other direction, looking toward Mount Baker Beach here in the distance, and you can see the mountain in the distance. And one of the goals that he has for Lake Washington Boulevard is public access to the water, but also that it will curve along the shoreline in a very organic way, so that every time you turn a curve, you get a different view and you get a different experience, and that variance that you get. And so I often joke that if it wasn't for Olmsted, I wouldn't have access to anything iconically you see out of the landscape, because I couldn't afford the view or the lakeshore. And so I'm incredibly grateful that we have this system. It's just, so many cities did not get this benefit, sort of synchronicity of different factors going on. And so this is a map of the park system. You can see where there were some really well-developed areas, and you can see some areas where it wasn't as well developed. Ballard didn't get quite as much. West Seattle didn't get quite as much in that early development. That's partly because of the, and also Southeast Seattle, there was a bit of a tangling at the expansion of the system of who would pay for that expansion of the system. And they directed Olmsted to only lay out properties that the people that lived adjacent to them would be able to acquire and pay for development of through the tax base. And so you're looking at the 3 areas that have the lower incomes in the city at that time, and less influence on the park board. And so you see a little bit less development in those areas. One of the questions that often comes up with the Southeast Seattle and the Lake Washington Boulevard development area is, what was the factor that led to a perception of less Olmstedian development? We sort of think of Volunteer Park, Lake Washington Boulevard, as Seward Park is those iconic Olmsted, like you know it when you see them. And a lot of people think it's because of redlining specifically, but it's actually a more complicated story. This is the map that was developed by HOLC, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, in their development of the redlining maps. And they are here identifying what they consider the minority neighborhoods in Seattle. And you'll notice that that's primarily the Central District, and the area south of there is not identified as having minority communities. And so then when we see the redlining map, the pinkish areas, of course, are the redlined areas. And you'll notice that Southeast Seattle is yellow, which is not the highest level, but it's kind of in the middle. And And so the redlining is not the primary factor. The primary factor in the reason that the parks in the South End and the Boulevard system is not well developed is largely because of timing. Right about the time that these neighborhoods really start to develop populations and develop improvement clubs that will advocate for park development, the Parks Board, the Board of Park Commissioners, begins to turn its attention away from the Olmsted Plan and toward other parts of the park system, other things that they want to develop. And so it's sort of, there's a pause and then a break, because then you have the Great Depression and World War II. And then after World War II, you have another pivot toward recreational facilities. So our playfields are really well developed in all of these neighborhoods, and the community centers and all of those facilities. The vegetation and the linear parks that the boulevards are not as well developed after the war. And so the weird sort of yin and yang of it is that the more park system development you have, the higher the property values, and the less you have the lower property values. And so Southeast Seattle, as you have white flight in the 60s and 70s, and you have the sort of systemic discrimination in education and employment, which makes those lower cost areas more appealing, that is when you see an extension down the valley of more communities of color. And then you sort of just see a disconnect, and you don't ever see that direct investment, and priorities were elsewhere. And that is how we kind of get to the situation that we see today. This is a map of today's sort of system with the dotted lines showing what could have been. And the Seward Park South extension of Lake Washington Boulevard was blocked by the property owners when Olmsted was planning. He wanted to extend the boulevard along the lakeshore, but it was already platted and purchased. And those property owners pushed the traffic into the interior here. The Henderson piece became just a regular arterial. Carkeek Drive up to Beacon Hill are developed as park boulevards, but not owned by the park system, which gives them a different sort of foundation. And an important piece of that is that park boulevards until the 50s were only available for park traffic. Commercial traffic and general traffic were not allowed to use them. There were park police that enforced that, and it was feasible until there became too much traffic. And for a lot of reasons, although they do it very kind of, it doesn't happen dramatically, it just happens that they open up all those roads to general traffic, and they become part of our arterial system in the 1950s, when you also see a tremendous increase in population of vehicles in the city. And so this is the view, I just love this one from Beersheba, that even though it's not as well developed, we still have this amazing genius of place that Olmsted intended. But it's important to remember that it was known as Atlantic City Park when Olmsted was here. And you can see how Beersheba Park, that connection to the water, is just more fully developed and much more it makes more sense. Like if you go to that park, its place on the lake makes sense. And that's something that's really been lost over the years. And those are the investments that have been really hard. The same is true of the entire boulevard, that sort of the soft values, the vegetation, the maintenance of the shoreline, the beating back of encroachments, all of those things have really changed the character of the boulevard. And that is one of the reasons that it's sort of struggling as a park landscape. Yes, that's the end. So that was sort of the breakneck. I don't know how I did on time, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, before anybody jumps in with any questions, I just want to thank you, Jennifer, so much. I had the pleasure of talking to Jennifer on Friday, and I am not a planner of any kind whatsoever, but very interested in this kind of stuff. And I'll say it was very enlightening and eye-opening to see and understand how all of these things were to connect. And Joey, I was thinking about you when you had mentioned in one of our last meetings of, and I don't want to mess up what you said, but what I took away from what you said was we could make changes to the road, or we could make changes to the natural area, right? It's a park and it's a natural area. Like, what investments can we make in the natural piece of this? And then just going back to like this investment in connecting the parks with this boulevard and making it feel more natural. It just made me think of that. And then having lived in the South End my whole life, to actually make that connection from Lake Washington to Henderson, up to Carkeek, up to Beacon, was like, oh, duh. Like I never saw it, right? I never saw it until I talked to Jennifer. So I really appreciate it, Jennifer. And I think this is good background for us all as we move forward in some of this work to really understand where Lake Washington Boulevard is coming from and some of its original intended uses. So hopefully people have some questions, any questions.
I have a question. When the Olmsted Boulevards were first opened up to general purpose traffic back in the 50s, was that decision like debated, or was that sort of lost to history? It just sort of happened.
As far as I can tell, it was not a big public debate. It appears to be that it started with the petitions for driveways, because all of those homes along the Clark Boulevards did not have vehicular driveways. And so as people acquired vehicles, they wanted to be able to pull into their homes because there wasn't any parking allowed on the Park Boulevards. And so that seems to have like wedged that sort of general traffic use in, because they of course need to leave their homes with their vehicles. But that is just a guess. I never was able to I thought it'd be an argument, because they really enforced it prior to the war. After the war, I think you just have a really different view of what the parks are for and kind of their role in the city and the boulevards too.
It's like Zach has his hand up.
Now I got to figure out how to unlower hand. Okay. I'm learning. I both had my physical hand up, and I've now learned to do the hand up emoji, but here we go. So I understand that you're part of the Seattle-based Olmsted Park Legacy organization. I'm wondering if you have any insight into other quote unquote Olmsted Legacy cities that had either the forefathers of this particular, but how have other cities dealt with the issues we're dealing with right now? And I happen to note that, and I think I sent it in the link last time, that apparently San Francisco has a very similar situation going on right now, where they had a big, what had been used as a roadway closed off during COVID, and now they're trying to figure out what to do. And I'm just wondering if you have any insight as to what your sister and brother organizations have done, and whether or not we could perhaps learn anything from what's happened elsewhere, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'd have to do some research actually into, because I'm like flipping through my brain of the different places that I can think of. And one sort of goes two different directions. Either their boulevards were developed with far more width than ours were. Seattle's boulevards tend to be much narrower than Olmsted prescribed, mostly because of the cost of acquiring land and private property already purchased. And so you have much less right of way in order to do the separation of grades. And so in other cities, there's often much more space, and they already have separation of bike lanes. They already have that infrastructure into it. Or it goes the other direction, and that's where I need to do the research. And I'm happy to do that and report back, is that there's other Olmsted park systems that have been sort of integrated more into the vehicular traffic system. And I'm not sure how they've dealt with that, but I'm happy to look into that and report back.
And as part of that, if I am still unmuted, if there are examples of ways in which, as technology has progressed, that different uses are now being shared. meaning they originally had designed much of this without motorcycles and other things. Actually, there were motorcycles back then. But if there are other examples of ways in which municipalities or communities have evolved and dealt with things like weekend closures, holiday closures, those sorts of things, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Anna just posted a link about what some Olmsted parks in New York have done.
And Terry's got his hand up too.
Yeah, I don't think it's apples to apples by any means, but there's certainly a number of examples in the Seattle system. I could say for sure in Denver, Olmsted Parks, where it has been determined in parks that it was time to close some of the roads within the parks to vehicles. Here, Green Lake, Denver, City Park, I think that there's, well, and including Ravenna Park, which is part of this circulation system that Jennifer's been talking about. So there are, and for different reasons, but there's a historic precedence for the importance of these, but there's also a historic precedence for closures that have been deemed for a number of different reasons to be appropriate.
I need to look, but my knowledge is that those are, the majority of them at least, are within parks, like you said, which is a little bit different than within more integrated into the street grid. But yeah, San Francisco Golden Gate Park has closed off one of it's the Kennedy Parkway is closed indefinitely, as far as I know, for that use, for a non-vehicle use.
So we probably have time for one more question, and I would definitely say just the idea of like Olmsted's vision for the parks and the use of it, keep that in mind for when we move into the strategy questions, because I feel like there's definitely a question that if there's things that really resonated with you from Jennifer's presentation that you're like, oh, why aren't we doing that? Or why didn't the city continue with that? That we can keep that in mind with the strategy question. So let's see. There was one more hand that was up, I believe. Or maybe not. Okay.
Well, thanks very much. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
I did have one question, Jackie. I'm sorry.
Perfect. Thanks, Edwin. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering, and Jennifer, thanks for the presentation. I was wondering if there's any history, particularly around Native Indigenous folks in that area and how they had used it, if at all. More just for knowledge. You know, there wasn't necessarily cars at the time. There wasn't perhaps the idea of parks as we see it today, but I think it would be really helpful to kind of just get a full picture of what use and vision was, if that information is available at all.
It is, and that's a really important layer to these landscapes history, is that Native people, there's multiple ways, and the park system, of course, well, not of course, but it's interesting how it overlaps with a lot of Coast Salish, Duwamish, and various other tribes in the region, their use of these shoreline park areas. And so Leshai Park, Beersheba Park, Washington Park are the three sort of along the area that I'm thinking of. I'm just flipping through my brain really quick. Ravenna Park, but sort of the University Village side of that. Those are all village sites, or they are places that were recognized for the resources that they provided. And so cattail reeds or tule or berries or places just to recreate, right? Or places to pass through. The trail that went from where the foot of Washington Street is on the Elliott Bay side, up and over where Yesler is to Leschi, that was a traditional route between the saltwater and the freshwater if they were not canoeing via Duwamish and Black Rivers. And so one of the other important areas is that there's some places of spiritual significance, and they, of course, the tribes keep that information to themselves, but it's important to know how important some of these places are spiritually to people. And then sort of as the traditional knowledge of these places, there's some really interesting stories associated with places along this area. And so I've talked with Warren King George from the Muckleshoot tribe quite a bit about this and about crossing places, landing places, fishing places. And it's pretty fascinating. Like the more fine grained you get, it just gets more and more interesting of what places were known for and their connections to different families and that sort of thing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's helpful as far as context. I don't know if there's anything related to perhaps how they used, I think you mentioned one of the routes, but I know a lot of the roads that created in a lot of major cities kind of followed what routes were, and not sure if, Lake Washington Boulevard was one of those. And yeah, but that is, I mean, just that information alone, I think is helpful. And if there's any other, if y'all can send it out, that would be awesome.
Sure. I would just real quick add that Lake Washington Boulevard would not have been a transportation route because we often call it the canoe highway. Why would you travel overland through this incredibly thickly forested area when you can hop in a canoe and travel far more quickly and easily? So that's my understanding, is that the routes would be up and over hills or to particular meadow areas and that sort of thing, but not along the shoreline in a sort of a linear fashion.
Oh, thank you.
Perfect. Perhaps we can get, if it's helpful or if we're able to, Jennifer, a copy of that presentation to send out in the notes.
Oh, sure.
Perfect. Great. All right, I'm gonna put the slideshow back up on the screen so that we can move to our next point. So we have just, I believe there were maybe a few folks at the last meeting who are here today, but were not in attendance at the last meeting when we went over the council budget action. And so we're not going to get too into the weeds on this, but if we need to come back to it for our discussion around the outreach and the tactics and our strategy, we can always revisit it here. It's here as a placeholder, but at our last meeting, we did kind of go through that council language as well as the budget breakdown of that $200,000. And so with that, we've talked a lot about the visions, mission, and core values of SDOT, and just, this commitment to equity, safety, mobility, sustainability, livability, and excellence. And then, we are going to be having some very, deep questions around strategy that are going to support with the rest of the work and setting up the foundation for this process. And so we just want to make sure, again, that you all, we went over these community agreements before, but the idea of sitting in your discomfort, take risks even when you're unsure, stay engaged when you're uncomfortable, listen for understanding, speak your truth, no fixing, be prepared your question may not be answered, expect or accept non-closure, don't dominate and share your mic, be self-motivated to search for your own truth. And so we'll just hold those with us today as we move through this strategy question. Lastly, of course, just housekeeping around digital things. If y'all need support, let us know. And then I'm going to pass it to Adonis because we did not get to talk about the updated timeline at the last meeting.
And I'll be super quick with this. Just here's where we're at. Summer 2022, which is actually, nope, we're still in summer 2022. Summer doesn't end until September. But with football season and all that starting up again. Summer feels like it's coming to an end. But here we are, we're meeting monthly. We are planning our outreach and engagement. We've been at a couple of just out and about at Othello Fest. We had flyers at Umoja Fest, people there to sort of share some information. As we move into the fall, we'd like to continue these meetings, but then that's when the outreach begins. But then also in the fall, some of that outreach, whatever we decide to do, and we're going to revisit this later in the slide. We'll summarize those findings and we'll begin to develop the report and the high-level design, sort of the high-level designs that we're looking at based on what we hear from people. And in the winter, 2022, 2023, January, we are hoping that we can finalize everything and turn around and have another community type event or a thing to report back to people and say, hey, we did this outreach last fall. Did we get it right? So I just wanted to kind of review that timeline. Here's where we're at. If people have questions, let me know. We can go to the next slide. And then just another sort of recap of where we're at and what has been done, what is happening. I think we all know summer 2022, closed Lake Washington Boulevard. At that time, SDOT received multiple comments regarding Lake Washington Boulevard through our inbox 2021. We did conduct a survey to better understand how people wanted to do that summer's leading up to summer 2021. We also met with community members to discuss potential closures when Sam was on board of Lake Washington Boulevard. And then we did do the closures, same 3-mile stretch of Lake Washington Boulevard on the weekends and holidays only. And here we are in summer 2022. And as a reminder, Seattle Parks is back to managing the closures, and now they have bicycle weekends. So it's a Friday evening to Monday morning deal. We are in the process of this visioning process, and we do know and acknowledge that others have done outreach, and we can discuss those a little later. So just wanted to kind of ground us in where we're at super quick.
Thanks, Adonis. Any questions from folks about this before we move on?
Terry.
Perfect.
See your hand up.
The one thing I'm kind of curious about is as much a piece of this as of the park system, and knowing that they are operating these current closures, was any consideration given to having one of them at the table within our group?
You know, we can invite somebody from parks. They're very aware. They are very aware that we are doing this process. They did not offer up anybody, but that also, we didn't say who should be on this. We did share the list of task force members with them. They agreed to that list. But moving forward, if that's something the group wants to do, we can definitely explore that, yeah. But they've been very much involved in pulling all of this together.
Just to follow up, I think that a comment back to them would be constructive if they're not at the table. There were some issues that we got feedback from in our group regarding the large group ride, the Obliteride, that came through our area here, and that there were all the normal typical families out there, and then another 3,000 riders or whatever that was. And that at least in the initial hours when the more aggressive riders were out, there was some concern about safety. So I think all I'm saying is, if they were at the table here, they would hear some of the feedback that is coming back from during the weekends. Maybe less relevant later in the year, but I just do want to make sure that gets back to them.
It will. Thank you for that.
And
exactly.
I see. Oh.
And I'll unraise my hand. So I understand part of this process is to sort of accelerate a recap so that the people that weren't here could at least understand some of the things that we've accomplished. That being said, I don't think that the slide indicating what the legislative action that created the money for this is an accurate representation of what that legislative action said. I think the legislative action was very specific. It said a task force would be created in order to consider ways to improve pedestrian and bicycle use, and to figure out what sort of facilities might facilitate that. I don't think it was a larger visioning edict. And perhaps, Adonis, you had it at one point and you shared it with folk, but it seems very specific. It says, here's $200,000 in order to figure out ways to increase pedestrian traffic and bicycle traffic, and to figure out what sort of facilities might, and I don't have it in front of me, but I think that the slide that was shown was much more general and less specific. Also, just, I'm going to have to leave pretty soon. I'm going to get on a plane here and I'm not going to be able to make the second one because I'm going to be out. And I just wanted to at least say that I will review the second one, but I'm not going to be here for the one on the 24th or whenever it is. That being said, I also think when you list the quote community agreements, that isn't something that this group came up with. That's something that you said, here are the community agreements that we will be abiding by. And so it wasn't really a process, it's just things that you suggested. And I think that the slide makes it sound like we spent a lot of time coming up with those things as the edicts. It was more the facilitator said, here's a list of things we would like you to do.
So,
real quick, because Jackie, Zach, I would push back because the truth is that it was presented to us with the question of, did we want to change anything? And there was a couple conversations about that, but I didn't hear particularly anything from you suggesting that it should be changed. And I just wouldn't want us to throw out there that somehow it was placed on us. As a facilitator, it just doesn't feel great when it's suggested that there wasn't a process. And I would argue that there was, and we agreed to it.
It was the facilitator essentially saying, we're going to have this thing. Here are a list of things. And none of us were asked which ones we would like on the list. It was just, how do you feel about these certain things? But that's less of a problem for me than the summary of what the legislative action said. And more, it was just all being sort of glossed over quickly. And it's not, I guess I agree with you on how it came out, but it's not like we spent a whole bunch of time coming up with a list like we did with our goals, which absolutely we came up, we discussed, and we came up with those 5. But it was more, we're doing this stuff, here's some agreements, or here's some things that we would like to do, be respectful, be this, be that. But I agree with you. But the review of what the legislative action says, I think that that's much more general than what I believe it says.
Yeah, and Zach, I don't disagree with you on that. I actually think if we're going to move forward as a group here, the operative word of improve is what our task is. Meaning, how do we improve? And I don't necessarily, it doesn't say increase, it says improve. And maybe it's us figuring out, what does that mean? Right? Yeah. What does improving pedestrian and bicycle use mean? And that clarity, I think, would be helpful for me as well. Sorry for talking so much, but just wanted to add.
No. And more than anything, I think the sooner we narrow what we're trying to do, the easier our task is. And I'm all for, at some point, saying, although you told us to do this, we got a lot of else to say on other subjects, right? And that's okay. But in terms of, I don't think what we were being asked to do was to come up with wonderful ideas on how to use the park. I think it's more specific. It's how to improve pedestrian and bicycle traffic. And then what's the other part of it? I don't have it in front of me. Maybe you do. Yeah. But
scroll back up, Jackie. Yeah, so one thing
can I pass it to you, Adonis?
Sure. Yeah. So this is language straight out of the legislation. I can reshare that too. I can find the link and reshare it. And so this is just copied and pasted over from the legislation. It's not necessarily a summary. I think it's their probably top summary of what the legislation says. And then to sort of circle full round to what we're all doing here. Based on this, there's this money given where we are looking at, these are suggestions, I guess. So I'll read through this again. The 2000 is proposed budget action that would allow SDOT to develop and evaluate design options that promote increased pedestrian and bicycle uses of Lake Washington Boulevard. Options to be considered. So this is things to be considered. This doesn't necessarily say this is what SDOT has to do. Now, mind you, we have run this language by our leadership, and we also briefed the council member's office as well on this to say, hey, here's what we're trying to launch. And no one said, don't do that, right? So it's not like we're operating over here in a vacuum without the council member and leadership.
No. And this actually, and I'm not being critical as much as observant, that I didn't, this wasn't up long enough for me to read the whole thing, if that makes sense. And so this absolutely includes those sorts of things. And in some ways, while saying I want to get more specific, I'm also, I love the expansion of off-street facilities. I mean, and man, particularly when it was hot, it was used by all sorts of people. And listening to the presentation about wanting parks close to folks so that people can use them, and it being difficult to commute to those parks. When it was so hot, you just saw that there is a demand for if people have proper access to these parks. And I would love to figure out ways in which we can get more and more, because those, 20 parking spots down at Mount Baker Beach can't service several hundred people. And I'm not saying lots more parking lots, but there's got to be some, and people overflow parking all the way at Mount Baker Park, all the way along the lake, just parking in between trees. Whether you like it or not, it increased the accessibility for lots of people to the park exactly when we needed it. And I really like the potential to suggest expansion of off-street facilities and other design concepts.
Well, we're gonna how about we have Alicia note that, because kind of what you just said is part of the first strategy question that we're going to be asking the group around the ideal experience for Lake Washington Boulevard. And so depending on how long you will be in this meeting today, I'm not sure if you'll be here when we get to that question, but honestly, like the things that you're saying right now are the type of comments and thoughts that we want to bring out of folks in the strategy strategy question discussion.
And I will talk for 10 more seconds and then hold my peace. Seattle Parks has designed a complete new bathhouse at Mount Baker Beach that's going to change this scary locker room thing into 6 to 8 comfort stations. And boy, would it be nice if somebody from Parks could tell us about where they are in that project, so that would help us to make it so that more people can use it for all sorts of reasons. And I apologize, I went over 10 seconds, but I'd love to have better facilities for everyone to use. Yep.
So just real quick on this, the one thing I am thinking about here is that when we do get to if we go, yeah, there we go. When we go back to the goals that people came up with, I think they're pretty much in line with what the council member is saying here. And I think everyone agrees that improving, increasing pedestrian bicycle uses, safety on the boulevard is a top goal for a lot of people. But also to maintain access for different types of motor vehicles and whatnot. The other thing I do want to sort of point out here too is that while this language, it feels pretty specific in the process of a project there, and we had this slide in the last one, we do have to plan, and we are in the planning phase of this. And in that planning phase is where we have these high level design concepts, if you will. And so that is what this money is being used for. And then if you look at the last sentence here, the outreach campaign should seek inclusive, representative, and meaningful engagement with the surrounding neighborhoods potentially impacted by the proposed design options. And that is why we have this task force here, to make sure that to the best of our abilities, we are as inclusive and representative and meaningful in our engagement. Patricia, I do see your hand up.
Thank you. So I just want to this is sort of a small detail, but in most of the wording, the interesting thing to me is the developing and design options sort of comes first in the paragraph, and at the very end is the engagement. But I'm hoping we think about the fact that we want to get the engagement before we develop our ideas.
It's exactly what we're doing. And like I said, we are definitely keeping the council member in our director's office and the mayor's office briefed on this, so that they're all in the know of what we're doing, and they have very much interest in this work. I can tell you that. So yeah, let's keep it moving, because I think
Okay, perfect. So, and then again, the community agreements that we went over in the first meeting, that these are agreements that I feel like are pretty tried and true in being able to hold spaces such as these and discussions. But perhaps somebody is able to put them in the chat. If there are community agreements you would like to add to this list, that's also welcomed as well. Want to make sure that everybody, that we're able to create a space and have agreements with each other to hold that space. So while these are not the agreements that are part of the, what's the outputs for like the visioning process, they are the agreements for us as a task force as we move through these next couple months and share space with each other and discussions. Okay, so let's see. At the last meeting, we did a lot of work to really unpack kind of what people's assumptions were about Lake Washington Boulevard and this project and the implementation of the project and potential changes to Lake Washington Boulevard. And through that process, we were able to kind of go through those assumptions and figure out if this is what we're, either afraid of or we're feeling like is not going to happen throughout this process if not done correctly or intentionally. What is it that we want to truly see? And so essentially, we were able to make the high-level goals that you see here. The first one, reduce the impacts of increased car traffic on Lake Washington Boulevard. Number 2, maintain and improve the park experience and reduce any real or perceived barriers to the park. 3, maintain or improve access to the park for all users, including cars, while increasing safety for people biking, walking, and rolling. And then lastly, work towards ensuring communities are heard and represented in this outreach and engagement process. So a quick note, these are not ranked in a particular order, but these are the goals that we really establish as where we're trying to go with this project. And when we think about what's going to end up in the report to the city, that we want to make sure that we're working out of these goals and kind of this umbrella of the vision of Lake Washington Boulevard. And so for those of you who were not here at the last meeting, this was done through a collective process. And so we want to just see if folks have any questions about these kind of main goals that we're going to be operating under. And there's lots of things that can go under this. I think Terry had brought up, making sure that we get engagement from surrounding neighborhoods and how yes, that absolutely falls under this larger goal of working towards ensuring communities are heard and represented in the outreach and engagement process. So just wanting to kind of differ a little bit between what would be a very specific tactic versus how does it fit under these kind of large umbrella goals that we have. And so with that, I see Terry first and then Patricia. I saw your hand go up after his.
Yeah, so clearly, of course, you guys are going to rephrase and refine what was said. But I wanted to say that I have a slightly different direction I'd like to go on some of these. And also I wanted to note that the thing that we got from Adonis yesterday, this has been reworded since that. So it's not quite consistent with what was sent out to us yesterday. But the bottom line for me is that I feel like reduce the impacts of increased car traffic is very squishy. Reducing impact without decreasing the car traffic is a pretty steep hill to climb. And so my own personal bias, and I know this was, this was a consensus document, but as soon as I read it, basically, my own opinion is reduce the car traffic on Lake Washington Boulevard. Therefore, you reduce the impacts. That's my main comment. And then there were a few other things that I noted when I got I marked it up, but that's, to me, the most important single issue here. And the thing that is really driving our program, but also the thing that's creating the biggest problems along the boulevard. So thank you.
All right, all of that is noted, Terry. Perfect. Patricia.
Yeah, I just thought, again, I think our first work is in terms of how we're going to frame a strategy. I think we have to put hearing from the communities first. And in that regard, I think work towards ensuring communities are heard is a little bit, as you said, squishy. I'm hoping we can commit to putting into play a process that allows and encourages and gives access to communities being heard. I mean, this seems
so that is what
looking toward. I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, so that's what we're going to be getting into today, is really getting into those nuts and bolts.
Right.
The hope is that we can review these goals so that as we move through the strategy questions and really develop the plan of how we're going to get here and what that looks like in implementation. So
okay, I can just finish up.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I think when you look at, this goes back to Terry's comments, when you look at reduce the impacts of increased car traffic, I don't read that as anything other than making it more safe for everybody. So I think this is saying we have to face the fact that we have increased car traffic on Lake Washington Boulevard and how that impacts safety. And I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that we're going to reduce overall the number of people using Lake Washington Boulevard. I think that's beyond our scope.
All right, thank you, Patricia. Edwin, I believe I saw your hand up. Go next, or your hand go up next. And if you're talking, Edwin, you're still on mute. All right. Well, I know we heard little ones in the background earlier, so feel free to hop in when you're able to. The next hand that I saw go up was Anna's.
Yeah, hi. And I apologize, I wasn't able to make the last meeting. And so I did listen to the recording, and I just had sort of two thoughts based on that, conversation that happened last time and what I see here. I think the first is, I am concerned, and I think it's sort of implied here, but maybe it needs to be a bit more explicit, that the current status quo, there isn't actually access for many people with mobility or vision disabilities who can't use the walkway. That's not accessible because of its sort of lack of maintenance and lack of tactile wayfinding. And so maintain or improve makes it sound like that there is actually a way for people to use Lake Washington Boulevard currently, and that's not the case. So just would like perhaps that to be part of this conversation as well, that there isn't really access for everyone right now. And then the other piece was just hearing the conversation and listening to it last time, and there was a lot of sort of back and forth on the impacts in other neighborhoods of traffic and traffic being diverted and traffic going off Rainier into other streets. And just sort of, I think big picture on that, I find it sort of challenging to think that, that some streets, say Rainier, we are okay with having these be high traffic streets, even though there are many people, especially folks who live in apartments who live along Rainier, that it's okay for them to be exposed to this traffic noise and pollution and say public health and safety consequences. And yet we're not okay with there being traffic in historically single family wealthier neighborhoods. And so I think that to me raised a lot of flags that this is a conversation about sort of preserving the status quo, and that felt not great. So just flagging that I really think we shouldn't be deciding which streets, which people, if we're talking about where traffic can and can't be, we have to think about who does already live in those streets. And what access to power they have. Thanks.
Thank you, Anna. All right. Let's see. Did I hear somebody come off of mute?
Oh, I just said thank you, Anna. Edwin may have his hand back up. I think he's back.
No, that was an accident. I'm sorry.
Oh.
Okay. All right, y'all. So let's move in. Okay.
Well, we should, I know we need to get to the strategy, but I don't want to leave us hanging on these goals either. Right? Because it's kind of important here. And I really appreciate what Anna had said. Jennifer has her hand up before I go any further on that one.
Sorry, I know that we're taking time. I just wanted to throw something out there because from what Anna said, just because it's something that I struggle with, like balance, is that I completely agree with what you're saying about nobody should have to live on overly trafficked streets. But if we think of the Boulevard as a community-wide asset, and I'm just thinking out loud, I'm not saying this is necessarily 100% true, but if we think of it as a community-wide asset and we want to preserve it as a park experience, then I guess maybe it's two different stories. Like Rainier should be fixed, but also not either or. And that might be, pie in the sky thinking, but can we have both, where we address the issues on Rainier Avenue and how it impacts the people who live there, and have this community asset where we do traffic calming or whatever that maintains and improves access or introduces better access, that it doesn't have to be one or the other. And but then I know that there's a limited number of resources. So I know that sometimes that is the unintended impact. And if we don't act specifically to prevent that from happening, that is the effect of it. So I acknowledge that, but I just wanted to throw it out there that maybe it doesn't have to be either or. And I just think about this a lot. So I wanted to add it to the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. And one way to think about these three, because, Aaron's got his hand up too.
So I don't disagree with that at all, Jennifer. I think that's for SDOT to say, like those uses of resources, like we bring to them our ideas and they say, yes, that's viable. No, that's not viable. I mean, they're the ones that allocate the resources. We come to them with the ideas. So I don't think that's, the traffic calming and Rainier improvements or whatever we are thinking about here. I don't think those are off the table at all. I don't think we need to try and read SDOT's crystal ball about what resources they have available and what they can do. We just give them our ideas.
Exactly. And the reason why I want to make sure we're tight on these top three, because I think the fourth bullet is something we all agree on, or as we are as tight as we can be on these top three, because these top three bullets when you flip it around, and to Jennifer's point and to Aaron's point, these become questions to the community, right? What are some of the ways that we can reduce the impacts of increased car traffic? And we may get a whole slew of answers that say, you know, limit the number of cars on Lake Washington Boulevard. And then the follow-up to that is sort of like, well, how do you do that? Is that increased bus service on Rainier Avenue? Is that better bus facilities in other places, right? Because so that these turn into questions. I won't go down that rabbit hole of how that happens, but if we don't have these kind of where we want them, then we're not necessarily asking the right questions, if that makes sense to folks. Does that make sense to some people?
I do have my hand up now, Adonis.
Okay.
So I appreciate you kind of bringing us back to this, because one thing for me is, at least on the goals, for example, with the first one, it's when we say reduce, we have to know what we're reducing. And I don't, I think it would be great for us to have a number that we're looking at, that we're saying we're reducing it from here, or a metric or something that we're pointing to that we're reducing. I would say the same for safety. Again, I mean, you may have shared it, and I apologize if I see it in the email, but it would be great if we have any data on accidents occur on the boulevard and increase in safety looks like compared to that, because then we can ask folks, here's what we're starting with, and we would like to decrease it. What ideas do you have?
I like that. So what you're saying is, and I know we're getting into a little bit down the road, but at the same time, it's like, we can say over such a time period, we've seen car traffic increase on Lake Washington Boulevard, right? It's gone from X% to X%. The boulevard, for whatever reason, is not designed to be that way. And we've seen X number of accidents happen in that same number of time. And then the question to the community is, what ideas do you have, or thoughts you have, or maybe it's a list of options folks have. I'm not sure what that looks like, because we need to get to that place, but I like that idea. And we do have those metrics. And I think one of the documents I may have sent out earlier should have that information. If it doesn't, I can get that information in there.
Great, thank you.
And Aaron, was your hand just still up, or did you have another question?
No, I had another question / comment, especially on Edwin's, just kind of tacking onto that. You know, we have reduced the impacts of increased car traffic on Lake Washington Boulevard, but if we actually defined what those impacts are, not just increased traffic, but are there, like, I think Adonis said this too, but are there more accidents? Are there more pedestrians or bicycles actually hit? Are there more safety concerns that are documented or documentable that we are specifically addressing?
Yes. Well, I'm not saying yes, there are. I'm going back to the document that I sent out. It's kind of a long, it has a lot of information in it, but I think it highlights some of those things.
Okay, I can look back at that. Thank you.
Okay, and Belen, feel free to chime in here too, because I think you and Jonathan is on paternity leave. He's one of the traffic planners who's working on this, who gathered a lot of that information for us.
All right. It looks like Belen, did you want to add anything, or you're good?
I'm good, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so let's see. I mean, it sounds like we are, you know, really getting into these strategy questions. So let's start with this. And then if we need to take a look back at our goals again, which if someone's able to put those into the chat, you know, for folks to see, we can go back to the goals. But it sounds like people are wanting to get into the strategy questions. Often when I think about doing work around building a strategy, I think about how these questions are able to help us process and think through all the pieces that we're supposed to be considering, so that when we go to create ideas and tactics, we should be able to measure it up with what it is that we said is kind of like our North Star and where we're trying to go, and then be able to explain how it can actually get us to our goals, because we're going to have such limited time and perhaps capacity that we want to be very, specific and strategic about what it is that we do. And so often when I support groups, it's really thinking about helping them create what their goals are, create what their North Stars are, so that when we actually go to do actions, we're rooting it in something. Because a lot of times you can do this great work of creating your goals and your strategy, but when you go to actually implementing it, it's like we forgot that we just went through this whole process. And so we really want to support you all into having these important conversations and really thinking about all the aspects that we need to be considering, so that the ideas that we have and go out into the community, they're rooted in something, and we can explain it, we can defend it, and we can show what the purpose is and why we decided to go this direction. Because obviously there's many ways that we could do everything, but we have to make, what our North Stars and decisions are, so that we can be specific about what we're going to be doing and intentional. So with that, we're going to go through a couple of questions. I believe we have about 6 questions for you all that we really feel are going to kind of help get us, situated in a strong foundation for the rest of this work. And that first question is what does the ideal Lake Washington Boulevard look like to you and the groups you represent? So we're thinking about what this ideal Lake Washington Boulevard looks like. And also, please, keep in mind the groups that you represent. What does that look like? Clara, I see that your hand is up. And if it's a question, feel free. If it's responding to one of the strategy questions, also feel free.
I apologize. I had it up because I was wanting to participate in the goals conversation, but then we moved on. Do you want me to answer this question? Because I have an answer for that as well. Or are we just answering in our heads for right now?
No, I'd like for folks to answer out loud. We have Alicia taking notes for us today so that we can record all of this and use it as we build out the implementation of this project.
Yeah, I think for me, my ideal Lake Washington Boulevard goes back to sort of what Anna was mentioning before, in that it's accessible to the people that it's not accessible to right now. And for me, that's biking and walking along it with a stroller. Right now, I can't really do either of those things unless there's less vehicle traffic. So for me, the ideal space would probably be like one direction for vehicles, so that there's still car access to all those homes and parking lots there, and like a wide multi-use trail on the other half of the street where I could ride my bike without feeling like I'm going to die, and push my stroller without having to lift it up and down the curb every time there's tree roots and stuff.
Thank you. Others, what comes to mind when you think about the ideal Lake Washington Boulevard? I see Jennifer, your hand is raised.
So I would say, coming from the Friends perspective, that the ideal boulevard would have a park-like landscape. So on the entire right-of-way, that it has a park-like experience. That the park is clearly a link. I'm sorry, that the boulevard is clearly a link in the system that extends from Henderson to Seward Park Drive to Lake Washington Boulevard to Mount Lake Boulevard and on north and south, and then also up to Jefferson Park via Mount Baker Boulevard and Cheesty. That experience is easy to understand and experience. And then that there are clearly delineated spaces, whether that's in time or in design for the different uses, so that it can be enjoyed, just like Clara was saying. And then that it's a park experience to drive the boulevard, and that's not just the landscape, but it's not, the experience doesn't start when you stop your vehicle or you stop your bicycle. It's continuous, like however you get to and move through the space is a park experience.
Jackie, and it looks like Terry asked a question in the chat. Oh, there we go. Here, looks like you're responding.
All right. Other folks, when you think about the ideal, Lake Washington, what the ideal Lake Washington Boulevard looks like, what comes to mind? And you're also welcome to type in the chat if you'd prefer. I see that Aaron, your hand went up.
Yeah, this is a little bit difficult because as part of the Lakewood Seward Park Neighborhood Association, we have a bunch of different groups that are all part of that association. We have very vehement views on, from folks that are a lot closer to the boulevard versus people that are farther off of it. And there's bikers in there, there's walkers, there's drivers, there's folks with disabilities. There's all of these different subgroups that are all part of that association. And so I really think that those would be opposed to each other at certain points in time. And so having a consensus as part of the group that I'm representing is very difficult to define. What I would like to know though, and kind of recognizing my own and my group's own power dynamics in this, and to define those, I mean, they are, they're middle to upper class, mostly white people. And I want to say that right off the bat, that is a power dynamic that we are all aware of, and that I would like to, in a certain way, kind of downplay my group's view of this at this point in time, because we have a certain agency in this, and we don't. I don't want to represent that specific agency without having underrepresented groups provide their input first.
Thank you, Aaron, for modeling kind of what the second question is around power dynamics we want to name and be aware of.
Can I add something?
Yes, please, Joey, go ahead.
Let's see, in terms of, what does the ideal Lake Washington Boulevard look like to me? You go back to, I think it was those 6 tenets of SDOT, and the final one was excellence. And that's my ideal in stopping no short of excellence. And what I'm talking about there is, this thing is called visioning, and not using a wisdom vision of just what we have, but what a vision of what it could be. And that includes some really big picture thinking. And we certainly talk about what does this mean to the money that's allocated to, our mission. And it seems like what we're doing is we're trying to control or pull apart and try to divvy up the current resources there without considering what really smart design, intelligent thinking, and modern technology can bring to us. I think I've said it before to this group, but I think when we look at just trying to solve Lake Washington Boulevard, we're not working towards excellence. And I think a comprehensive plan brings much bigger money, much bigger ideas, and much bigger thoughts to what this can be. I start with turning Andrews Bay into a natural area. And what does that mean? That means increasing the amount of money that can come into a larger scale project. This project would include everything from a seasonal bus route for Metro that goes up and down Lake Washington Boulevard, providing more access to people who park further away but still can get to those cherished areas that they want to get to. It talks about traffic controls that slows down traffic and gets more people to appreciate it in automobiles. It's talking about building walkways that are separate from bicycle rideways. And it's understanding that when we talk about bicycles, you're not talking about one thing. You're talking about recreational riders, people who are competition riders, people who are strolling on bicycle Saturdays, people who are just out for a jaunt, all the different types of methods of unicycles and powered bicycles and so many other things. So you can't put that in one basket. You know, look at Burke Gilman Trail and look how that's being used. You're not going to be able to solve bicycles with one solution. So really bringing everybody to the table and looking at how we can actually elevate the area that is the natural area that's been created, you know, within Seward Park, Andrews Bay, and elevating its use and getting more people to appreciate the birding, the fishing, and just catching, you know, rays out there. There's a lot of opportunity there. We're not going to get it with $20,000 or $200,000. We certainly aren't. So if you want to really get into this thing and make something that's going to be excellence, you're really going to have to get a big picture thinking. And it's not going to happen in 2 months or 3 months or by the end of next winter. You're really talking about a much more comprehensive plan that brings in more partners. And I'm not sure where that begins, you know, how that starts, but, you know, whatever we come up with now, I imagine is going to be debated for the next 5 years, reconsidered in another 5 years, and reimagined in another 5 years. We're not thinking long here. We're thinking short term. And I think we owe it to the people who want to see this thing resolved to come up with a much bigger and broader solution.
Thank you, Joey. That is definitely noted and great feedback that we'll be able to, you know, provide throughout this process. Terry, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, so the ideal Lake Washington for me was when I first walked down along the lakeshore between Mount Baker and Stan Sayers during the first closures for COVID. And for the first time in a long time, I could hear the lake. I could hear the water coming up to the shoreline. It wasn't heaven to listen to all the vehicles zooming by. So certainly having a number of days a year where we can enjoy that stretch of the road without any cars. I'm not pushing for it all time, but I think that more and more days like that, the more people will learn to appreciate the incredible park that's there and the value that is not shared by many places in the city. And I would like to, another ideal would be that more people, in particular people who commute by bicycle, could actually go back on the boulevard and feel safe. Most of the people that I talk to who have been lifetime riders feel it is not a safe place for them to either commute or to ride. And I think it's a measure of, one of the things we talked about a few minutes ago was how do you measure improvement? Well, one way of measuring improvement is when more people who are perhaps your sort of average everyday rider feel that they can safely go down there and ride. The ideal for me also is that this ceases to become a commuting route for people other than in the immediate neighborhood. Those, I guess, are my ideals. Certainly the power dynamics are all over the place. And I think that it was well stated about the Mount Baker neighborhood, and I mean about Stewart Park, but it also applies to Mount Baker, that this is a neighborhood with a lot of influence and people who are used to riding the city and saying this is what we don't like and this is what we want. And so I think we really need to listen to, as was worded in the language of the ordinance, to the surrounding neighborhoods. I do not think we should put much emphasis on trying to solve the long-term commutes through the city. So, but anyway, once again, the more days it's closed, the more days it can behave be allowed to be a natural area rather than a highway, the better for me. And I think that would be true for the Rainier Valley Greenways, as I said in an earlier meeting, Rainier Valley Greenways and Seattle Neighborhood Greenways position, which I think is based on a lot of observation over the last 2 years, does include what Clara mentioned, which is separated use of the road and going one way with all or part of it. Thank you.
All right. Perfect. If folks would like to type in the chat any other ideal, what the ideal Lake Washington Boulevard looks like for folks, just in interest in time, please use the chat. If you're not able to use the chat, if you're driving or your hands are occupied in another way, I'll invite you to come off mute and share so that we can have it on record. All right, so let's see. I see Aaron, your hand is up.
Sorry, the ideas of, I just wanted to add to Clara and Terry's idea of when they were talking about the single road, dividing it between a lane for cars and a lane for bikes and pedestrians. The other thing that I want to make sure that we catch in this is that we improve the path itself for walking and running and pedestrians. And I believe Anna mentioned this before, but that path's in a really bad shape. And it's a finite thing that SDOT and probably parks more than SDOT can do to greatly improve that area for access, especially with for disability access, and for pedestrians and strollers and everything like that. That is something that my group especially can be in a unanimous approval about. So we need to have that path fixed. We need to have it leveled out. We need to have it, the roots probably not shorn. And I know there's issues with this and the tree and the cherry trees and all that stuff, but there's aspects of it. They can raise the lakeside of it, make it flat, and keep all of those roots with permeable pavement or something to make it a better path, because it's in really bad shape right now. So in addition to those two ideas that one idea basically of the lane separation and a lane for cars and a lane for people, I want to say that we need to, no matter what, we need to improve that path. That's it.
Great, thank you so much. All right. Did I hear somebody come off mute? Okay, perfect. So we named a couple of power dynamics. Okay, Ty, I see that your hand is raised.
Yes, hi, I am in the car, and I apologize because I'm not exactly sure everything that's been said because I just got on the call. But you were asking about what does an ideal Lake Washington Boulevard look like?
Yes.
And I think an ideal Lake Washington Boulevard looks like accessibility for all. So yes, that does include better paved spaces for walkers and bikers, and it definitely includes maintaining access for motor vehicles. And I think similar to what Joey was saying, it's a really narrow scope that we have, and are we doing a disservice to the community if we're only looking at specific things? So wanting this road to be solely for leisure and not recognizing that it is a road for motor vehicle commuters, especially when you have something like the Rainier Avenue Road Diet, and more people moving to Seattle. And some of these people that are moving to Seattle still have motor vehicles. Understanding that it still needs to be a commuter road for people is an ideal for me. Also understanding that when we talk about disability access, it's not just about paved ways for wheelchairs and things like that, but I talk to a lot of people who have disabled elders who the way that they access Lake Washington Boulevard is driving down the boulevard. They might not have the physical ability to get out of the car and use a paved walkway. And so once again, the ability for every user of Lake Washington Boulevard to coexist so that motor vehicles still have access and pedestrians and people on wheels have a safe place to be as well. I'd also offer that, have we looked at installing speed bumps in the way that the Arboretum also has speed bumps? So what are ways that we can make it safer for everyone? And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ty. All right, let's, Adonis, I'll let you go next, and then let's try to move into the next question around power dynamics we want to name and be aware of.
Yeah, and so I just want to highlight, I did put some traffic and collision data in the chat, and it's a PDF. Let me know if you can't access the PDF. And then 2, I am hearing a lot of questions for the community in this first question that Jackie has proposed to people. And so the question of Lake Washington Boulevard being a part of a network of roads that go north-south, and thinking big picture about that, there could be a way, if we were to do a survey or a questionnaire or whatever we decide to do, of asking that question. I don't know exactly what that question looks like, but it is something that I think can be pointed out in a survey question or a questionnaire question of what does this network look like, and how do you do one thing here and not another thing there? And we can work on that down the road. But in the, so I just want to make sure we're sort of like, there's great questions in there to ask people while we are debating it, but also think like, is this a question we can ask people out in the community when we get to that phase of that outreach, right? Of what that looks like to them. So I just want to sort of highlight that.
Great.
And I will do a quick time check. We are at 5:37. This meeting goes till 6. And Jackie will take it from here, but we will likely end up in a situation where we may have to be doing some of this work online to get to a place to get our outreach moving.
All right. So we did hear a few power dynamics already that we want to be cognizant about as we move through this process. Are there any other power dynamics that folks want to name when it comes to thinking about who has influence and say over this work, and what are the power dynamics behind who has that influence and say, or who doesn't, or who's not represented? What are some of the things that we want to be aware of? All right, so I see Ty, your hand went up.
Thank you. I think in terms of power dynamics, who has been invited to the room? I have been asked by a few people how the people that are on this task force how is it determined who is on the task force? That has been a question that has been asked of me several times. Also a consideration of the groups that are represented, like what types of budgets they might have. in terms of power, like for people who feel like their voices aren't heard, are they part of a group that is actually represented and organized? And so are there voices that are missing that because they're not part of a official organized nonprofit or organization, are their voices being heard? I'm also going to state the obvious that the task force is, in my opinion, heavily skewed towards people who are interested more in the access for pedestrians and bikes and things like that, and not motor vehicles. I'm done.
Thank you, Ty. Those are all great points. Okay, and that we'll be using as a part of our discussion. Erin, I see your hand is up next.
I just wanted to let Ty know that there's a very strong contingency of LSPNA folks that are very motor centric from that point of view. We are actually more skewed towards making sure that there remains motorized access to the boulevard than to take all motorized access away and to have it only bike and pedestrian. Like, I just want to make it clear that we aren't even 50-50 on that. We're more like 75-25 as far as the group as a whole wanting to maintain motorized access to the boulevard.
Thanks for that clarification, Erin.
No problem.
All right, anything else that folks would want to bring out? Let's see. Adonis, was your hand still up or? Okay.
Let me take my hand down. I do want to acknowledge something or just recognize Ty did mention, we do have another slide here that just talks about who is not represented. So it's on the next slide. And then the other thing I heard you mention, Ty, who has, and this is just my notes here, but who has access to government, because a lot of folks on this task force have engaged with with SDOT on some level. And so there's that question of how were people picked to be on the task force? And at some point they had engaged with the government, with SDOT. And so they knew how to have that access to the government. And I recognize not everyone has that same access or that same know-how. So I do want to acknowledge that point.
All right. Thank you. That's exactly why we have these conversations. All right. So Clara, I see your hand is up as well.
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot of really good stuff coming out of this conversation. I appreciate everyone's thoughts. I just wanted to raise one other power dynamic that we've talked a lot about, like recreational biking, but I just wanted to raise that, like, there's not currently a single route from anywhere in Southeast Seattle that people can bike in a safe or protected way to any other neighborhood in Seattle, whether that's going downtown or going east or going north, but not to downtown. There's not any route that exists like that at this point. So for people who are trying to get around on bikes for transportation, there's really limited ways to do that safely right now. And I think in Southeast Seattle, a lot of people who are biking for transportation end up on sidewalks in a lot of places, even if just for portions of their trip. And that feels really endangering, both for the person on the bike and for the pedestrians around them and for everyone else. I know that happens to me a lot. Thanks.
All right. Okay, anything else before we move to the next question around how would we define our North Star for racial equity in this work? Okay, who would like to kick us off when we think about the last time we met, we had, we're able to go in depth around the City of Seattle's Race and Social Justice Initiative and how that is applied to projects and work such as this. And so with that being said, we also want to make sure that we're embedding that into our project as well. And so how would we define what our North Star for racial equity will be for this work? All right, so let's see. Ty, I believe, is your hand just still up, or did you want to answer this question?
Sorry, I was supposed to lower my hand, but I will just offer, like, maybe one of the things is, what community groups are we engaging? Are we engaging, you know, racial or ethnic community groups that are well known in Seattle? Some of them I mentioned on the last in the last meeting, but I would say maybe that's one of the guides that we can use.
Perfect, thank you. I believe I saw Patricia's hand and then Joey's.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I was just thinking that would be a very strong focus for us for our outreach, is to put that at the forefront in thinking about, we know what groups are represented on this team. I would say we were quite overrepresented in terms of cycling advocacy and cyclists compared to our general population. And so we have to keep in mind that we have a lot of input, and so does the city also, a lot of input from, you know, really super dedicated, organized people, and that we make the focus of our outreach to look at racial equity in our outreach. And I did put, I sent quite a few documents, so I'm sure it was kind of a bewildering array, but from community members, I have compiled a list of possible outreach possibilities. And I think if we can all bring ideas about outreach, particularly to the groups that we feel are underrepresented, I think we could do a good thorough job in outreach to help us with that.
Thank you. All right, so I believe Joey, your hand was up, and then we'll do, I believe I saw Anna and then Jennifer.
Yes, thank you. So I certainly want to piggyback on the folks who have mentioned representation on the folks who are actually making decisions in this area. But I think a large part of it has to also include the budget that's allocated for projects here. And if we say, well, we only have enough money to pave 1/4 of a mile of sidewalks and make them more accessible for people in wheelchairs, then, you know, we have to look at how those funds are allocated across the rest of the city. And does this region receive the adequate funding based on the number of people and the issues that we face here? Is that going to be equitable use of that funding, or is it all going to other resources? We bear the burden of so many things, like having stadiums and other things like that here in the south part of Seattle. I think we should also benefit for having that burden placed upon us, so we can actually move this area forward in terms of accessibility and other issues. The money, all about the money.
Thank you, Joey.
Sorry, Jackie, I just have a quick comment response to Joey. I think that is an incredibly important point to consider as we are thinking about this. I know when we had first started, we were using framework for how decisions get made. And I think a lot of that thinking was somewhat in line with what you were saying, Joey, as we're not going to get $2 to $5 to $10 million all in one shot down here in Southeast Seattle for Lake Washington Boulevard. We're going to get 100,000, 200,000, maybe 300,000. And of all the different things that community members are going to say they want or they need down here, in this region, we have to figure out a way to prioritize where that money will go, because otherwise we're sort of back in the same spot of like, well, people said they wanted all of these different things, but we've only got so much money. So what are we actually going to do? So we are sort of pivoting to the letter and the word of the legislation, but it is just something to think about as we draft this report and these next steps and some of the questions we may ask people, because at some point there will be some money and we're going to have to decide what to do with that money of all the different ideas that we get from all the people. So I do want to put that out there.
All right. Let's see, Anna and then Jennifer.
Myself off mute here. Yeah, I mean, this is Anna, and I guess my comment is around sort of, what is equitable representation? And I think I hear a lot about how, quote, overrepresented people who want to see bike and pedestrian access on this corridor. And I guess I was involved in a lot of advocacy around the state transportation package and a lot of focus groups that our state DOT did. And I remember being part of one group with agricultural interests in Eastern Washington. And, for us as non-drivers, we have a lot of issues and a lot of passion about changing the way our transportation system works currently. And so we're showing up and we're being really engaged and active because the status quo isn't working for us. And I remember in this meeting, some of the ag interests who were represented there were like, well, actually, we don't really have anything because it's actually working pretty well for us right now. And I think, I think there's some amount of the reason perhaps there's so much engagement from those of us who don't currently have a, safe or comfortable access to this corridor is because, that isn't something that is something that's really important to us. And it's not something that's currently accessible. And so I think there's sort of the assumption, I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but I think that it's important that we talk about everyone being able to use this space. And even if that means changing who uses it right now, I think it's important that everyone be able to use it safely.
I totally got what you were saying, Anna. For the folks who, if it works, there's really no need for them to speak up and be heard. For the folks where it doesn't work, they say it doesn't work. And those folks will likely be overrepresented because it doesn't work for them. So I totally got what you were saying.
All right, how about Jennifer?
Well, I feel like I have kind of an unformed idea, but I wanted to just throw it out there, just being a historian and thinking about how things have gone in the past, that whole idea of the equity of the change, not just the equality of change, that the equality of access, just because there is not technically a barrier, but to really carefully look at how any changes that we propose will be perceived by different users and how that will affect their experience in the park and on the boulevard. So I guess I would just say the short version of that is to really be mindful of the equity versus the equality, because I think technically all our parks are equally available to everyone, but that doesn't mean that they have an equity of access or experience within them.
All right, thanks, Jennifer, for that explanation. And I'll also just kind of add on and emphasize on that it will be helpful to really also ground the discussion in equity in racial equity, because we know that's at the foundation of what the historical injustices have been in this country. So with that, we just want to make sure that we're keeping in mind that with decisions, we're really thinking about the historical impact, particularly on communities of color, whether that be access, exclusion, or lack of inclusion and marginalization, that all of that has an impact on what Lake Washington Boulevard looks like today. And we'll continue to make sure that we're running our ideas up against a North Star around racial equity. I see Edwin's hand is up, and we'll call on Edwin before we talk about next steps.
Awesome. Thank you, Jackie. Is it possible to share my screen real quick?
Yes, let me stop sharing.
Let me see if it lets me do this. I just want to show, so this is North Star Cycling, and we collected data on.
Wait, if you're trying to show something, Edwin, it's not showing.
Oh, it's not showing. Oh, that's weird. Okay. Then I maybe I can't. Let me try again. Oh, there we go. Let me try this again. Can you see that?
Great. Now we can see something.
Great. So we collected data of riders part of North Star, and we have, hundreds of riders that are all Black and brown, and we asked them to share their routes, and it was super fascinating to see where folks ride. Right. I mean, they go up north, but the darker the line, the more time people have ridden there, and you'll see here that the Boulevard is definitely heavily trafficked, and folks use it as a way to get around, do South Lake Union to go home, a number of things. And so we haven't finished the data, the analysis isn't finished, but I wanted to share that because at the end, not as an advocate for North Star exclusively, but our approach is we want to have space that keeps us safe from having to experience some pretty racist stuff that happens living in this city. From us cycling, we've had people spit on us. We've had people scream at us from their cars, calling us names. People don't believe that we own the bikes that we have. And this is from across the board, whether they're cyclists or they're people walking or they're people in their cars. They see a group of Black and brown folks, and all of a sudden we become a target in a very quick manner. And so whatever we do with the Boulevard, for us, if it's Black and brown folks driving down the Boulevard, they shouldn't be more policed than white folks. If it's folks riding their bicycles, they shouldn't be more policed than other folks. And folks who are getting access, and I think the points Anna makes, the disability justice conversation is a conversation of racial justice. There are Black and brown folks who don't come to the park because it is not conducive for them. And so for us, it's really saying, how do we make sure that this is a park that we get to see ourselves in? And I keep saying park, but the Boulevard, that a place where we see ourselves in, and see ourselves back into, to try to de-gentrify what has been a place that's constantly pushing our folks out. Would it be great to have a safe place for bikes? Yes, because a lot of our folks don't ride on the Boulevard, that, as folks mentioned, because it's terrifying. I mean, there's cars going 35, 40 miles an hour, and you say, you know what, I'm just going to walk my bike. So I think the community can help us solve that. But as far as what is our guiding principle for us, is just making sure that we are contemplating who will be left out, who needs to be put at the front, and so that equity is the center of it, and making sure that it is the place that we can all see ourselves in.
Thank you, Edwin. All right, so we have just a few minutes left, and I'm going to pass it over to Adonis.
Yeah, I've got pages and pages of notes from everyone, plus the chat. I do want to point out, well, a couple of things. Two things. One, the first is I really want to make these meetings worth it for you all. I know it's a lot to cover, and I think even just this small representation of the larger community and the discussions that you're having about the network, gentrification, race, and people and cars and bikes and safety and how you feel is extremely complicated, which is hard to pack into a 2-hour meeting when, there's probably some folks who say we just need to do one thing. There's other folks who say we need to do another thing. So I think just some recognition that this time is not wasted. I really hope you all don't feel that way. I'm pretty like, we spend this 2 hours, and after this 2 hours, we have to have an outreach plan, because we've got to, we've got a deadline for when we need to spend the money, et cetera, et cetera. But having said that, there is a few more steps that we do need to go through. No, I'm not asking you all to stick around longer tonight. But there are some steps that we still need to go through in terms of the strategy. We will send this PowerPoint out. And if you don't mind answering some of the questions via email, taking a look at what some of the tools and tactics are in the presentation, because we do go on to say, who are the easiest people to reach, who are the hardest people to reach, what are some of the tools we can use to collect information. Because I also heard today a lot of great questions that can be asked of people and to get their feedback. So there's tools to do that. There's surveys, there's questionnaires, and then there's also the tactics of how do we want to do that? Do we want to do mailings? Do we want to do door-to-door? And we can do a combination of all of those different things. I would ask you all to not worry about the budget. I mean, it is a thing, but don't worry about it. If you say we should do a survey and we should mail that survey and present that survey to community groups, because that is in line with our strategy of making sure that the most underrepresented people are heard, then great, run with that. Or if you have another idea, but there's a little bit of work to keep us on track to keep this moving, that I'm gonna have to ask people to do offline, if that's okay. And then Jennifer, I do see your comment here about a shared Google Doc. I think we can do that. Yeah, I think we can do that. Give us a day to get that document together and we'll send it out to the group, because we do have another meeting next Monday. A bit of logistics before I get to you, Aaron. I will not be there. Ching will be leading that meeting. I'll be on vacation next week, so she will be leading that meeting. But hopefully in that next meeting, we can take a look at some of the answers people gave. And then Terry, I also saw your comment about the data and a briefing on the data. I think we can work something out. Let's think about how to do that while also keeping things moving forward. So the other housekeeping thing that I do want to bring up, so Ed Ewing has decided he's going to move on from the group. That gives us some space. We have some space for a couple more members, and you can answer this via email. But if there's someone from Lake Washington Boulevard that lives on Lake Washington Boulevard that wants to be a part of this task force, some suggestions would be welcome, because we don't actually have someone that actually lives on the boulevard on this task force. So that is a question to the group. So if you know someone, please email us about that. And then there is another person that we will likely add to that was recommended by another member. And then I can give you some more information when I get more information about them. Aaron.
Purely housekeeping stuff. I'm calling from my car because we're actually in Yellowstone Park and I had to come out to West Yellowstone to get actually any reception. And we're on vacation for 2 weeks. So I didn't know what kind of turnaround you're looking for these questions that you're going to be submitting via email.
Well, I'm definitely not going to tell you to like take an hour to go do a bunch of homework when you're on vacation. Anytime.
It's okay. I just didn't know if you were looking at like the next week or the next 2 weeks or.
Well, hopefully we can get these before next Monday, because next Monday we'd like to just be able to, and we'll do a shared Google Doc so everybody can see what everybody else is saying. And then what we can do come next Monday is say, hey, here's what everybody said, who are maybe some of the groups that we definitely need to reach. Everyone's trending towards a survey and they would like to do a mailing with an open house to follow up. Are these the things we want to do? Because at that next meeting, we do need to work back in time on when we want it to happen, the things that need to happen, and the questions that we want to ask. Because I think if we had a good conversation now, wait till we try to ask people questions, because we only got so much space on a piece of paper to ask questions before it gets too unwieldy and no one answers any questions because it's too much. So I would say probably before next Monday.
Okay.
And we will try to get this document put together and sent out by the end of the day tomorrow.
Cool. Thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions, suggestions? Like I said, I really want you all to feel like you're getting something out of these meetings. I know I am, but also I get it's very complicated. Future meetings so we can plan ahead. Yes, we can also get that to you as well, Clara.
So I have a comment about the scheduling of these meetings. We had a doodle poll originally asking us when we were available, but there's been nothing that I've seen that's kind of a back and forth about when people are actually available for especially during prime time August holiday season. And so it's a little, this meeting and then, it almost seems arbitrary, and it also makes it very hard to plan around these meetings. And so I'm just asking that you guys be a little bit more deliberate about a longer term calendar for us. I thought, I did email you and said that, why are we meeting a week after this meeting instead of a couple of weeks, which gives people a little more time to actually process the information that's coming back and forth. So that's, I frankly, it's been a little frustrating for me, and I'll be around. I will miss the next meeting. I will be around a lot more after the rest of the year. But this is when people take vacations in Seattle. So I just, this has been a bit of a frustration.
So Terry, I think our doodle poll pointed to the third Monday of a meeting every third Monday of the month. And so that is the plan. This meeting in particular, we had talked at the last one, just because we are on kind of a timeline to try to squeeze in an extra meeting. So this is an additional meeting. This is not one that was like we have planned. So every third Monday of the month, you should expect that's what the doodle poll told us, or for people's availability. This particular meeting is one that we had decided we wanted to do because we're trying to get our outreach launched as soon as possible. We are sort of the council member, the mayor's office, SDOT. We will be getting into budget season here pretty soon. And some type of like indication of what the community is saying will go a long way in helping to either identify or allocate funds in November. So I just that's why we're sort of having this extra meeting, why we're asking you to do a little bit of extra work offline to try to have something to present to our leadership on.
So the other thing that I'm sorry to take us extra time because we're over, but it's the time of day also. So I guess what I would ask is that you guys, at least a month ahead, give us a calendar and of the dates and the times, so that we can get these set off on our day planners and we know where we're going. Because it's just, I feel like it's a moving target. So
that's fair. Are there any other questions for me that I can help with? All right, we will get so here's what we'll do. We will send out calendar holes for the rest of the year. And those should be the third Monday of every month, just so that you're on your calendars so you can plan for that. We will send out a Google Doc with the questions that we have asked along with the PowerPoint. You can fill out the Google Doc, and then we will see some of y'all next Monday. Thank you all.
Great. Thanks, everyone.